Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Pop Culture Problems. I'm Josh Nichols, and we're going to talk to you about stuff and junk. But I'd like to introduce you to the first cartoon character turned human, John Oderman.
Wow, that's high praise. I don't know if it's high praise.
You are literally like a walking animation to me. Like, you're just, you embody all of the physicality of a cartoon character, and also the humor, and also just the very generic features that can be easily paint bucketed in a Photoshop program. Like, you just kind of have that, like that, you're a simplicity, but complexity to you.
I think I'm going to cry. That may be the nicest thing anyone's ever said to me.
I thought you were going to cry because I was making fun of you. I thought you were, getting upset. John, speaking of cartoon characters, cartoons are one of those things that I think people have a niche into one or the other. Like, for instance, there's Disney, and then there's Looney Tunes, and there's, some like Nickelodeon, and they all have their own unique brand and their own unique style. But I'm not sure that the same is true for puppets. There is only one brand of puppet that I know and respect.
There really is. I mean, yeah. And that's the Muppet.
The Muppet. I mean, Jim Henson had a specific brand. And I know of a few puppets in modern day. And maybe a couple I can identify in previous day, but 95.8%, and considering 40% of statistics are inaccurate or false, 97.8% of Muppets or puppets are Muppets. Wouldn't you agree?
And would you define, like, some ventriloquist dummies? I mean, that's a dummy, but like, I feel like those have even like kind of migrated more towards the Muppet category, just because the Jim Henson Muppets are so popular. You don't see really puppets anymore, I don't think.
Well, yeah, you don't really. I mean, there's a couple comedians that use them, but that's about it. Like performance wise. But back in the day, I remember it was like Lamb Chop, like, and that was like a sock puppet, but it wasn't in that category of Muppet puppets. Now I know of a couple. This is
the song that doesn't end.
Yes,
that was from Lamb Chop.
And this show goes on and on, my friend. It really does. We started talking about it and not knowing what it was, and we'll continue segueing from. Okay. Woo! I mean, I could fill up 30 minutes of just that,
over and over again.
But I mean, really, Jim Henson had such an impact on culture and that style. I equate it to, because it's not really done anymore, Ray Harryhausen and his claymation with like Clash of the Titans and that whole collection. Yep. He was the claymation guru. There was not that style of stuff, in some earlier movies, but he really was the iconic one. He's the one that did most of it, or the most pop culture.
I think another example is like the Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer and the Island of Misfit Toys and things like that. Those they've permeated our culture. I mean, it's become part of like, I think, who we are.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And you don't see those anymore, though. Like they kind of have,
you're right,
have gone away. And I think in some ways, sad to say, the Muppets are also trending towards that extinction zone. Now, I'm going to remove Sesame Street from that, because Sesame Street is it's a little different. The Kermit the Frog Muppet versus like what I'm talking about is like the Yoda Muppet, the or puppet, or whatever you want to call it, or Labyrinth, or the Dark Crystal, and those things, like, used in movies as a practical effect, they seem to be dead. When you're talking about a children's show that's been on for 30 years, they continue that, and I think it's okay, but I almost separate that. The other version of the Muppets, the one that you see in movies, they're getting rid of more of those practical effects and replacing it with CGI.
Yes and no. I mean, one thing that J.J. Abrams made sure he did with the new Star Wars movie is he leaned more on practical effects where he could. And that was really nice to hear when I heard him talking about it at Comic-Con. They actually brought one of the guys on, like one of the practical effect creatures onto the stage, and it was really cool because I think that brings a level of realism, because I know there's a lot of people that just can't stand CGI because it's almost kind of like a shortcut.
Yeah. My girlfriend just rolled over in her bed. I mean, she literally, I hear her squirming because you talked about CGI, and she cannot stand any CGI. If it has CGI in it, she will not watch it. It is sickening. I can't watch almost any movie because almost all of it has CGI in some regard into it, and she cannot stand it.
She just storms out of the room.
No, she just hates it. I mean, it's more projectile vomiting. I mean, it's a mess. I mean, I have to clean up.
So you really can't watch the movies because there's more cleanup involved than actually enjoying the movie.
Yeah, absolutely. It's worse in a movie theater with popcorn and pop all over the ground. It's a sticky mess. Yeah. We really digressed here.
Yes.
But, I think that when I talk about practical effects, even in the new, and I haven't seen the new Star Wars movies, and we'll get into my whole Star Wars thing later at some point, I'm sure. But do the new movies have a lot of creatures that are practical effects? Is it typically a guy in a suit? Or do we have any Muppets? Do we have any, of those animatronic faces or controlled via sticks? Do you have a lot of those?
A little bit. I don't think there's a ton, but there's a little bit. I mean, if we ever watched Force Awakens, I could point them out to you which ones are. But, see, I'm appreciative of everything, not just the practical effect, puppets or Muppets, whatever you want to call them, the creatures from the Henson Workshop or whatever. I don't think that the Muppets as we know them, like Miss Piggy, Kermit, Gonzo. I know you alluded to the fact that you think that their time in our culture might be over with. I'm not so convinced of that because I mean you put on. I have some of the old Muppet Show DVDs and I put them on for my nephews, and they love them. They eat them up. And I think the thing that they've gotten away from is what made the Muppets the Muppets.
Well, and see, I guess I'll make a distinction here. I wasn't saying that the Muppets are not. I was more subsetting Muppets into two categories. You have the Sesame Street, Kermit, Miss Piggy, those cartoony kind of Muppets.
Okay, gotcha.
Versus the more creature... Hoggle from Labyrinth or the Dark Crystal creatures. They were more dark and mystical.
Where you're kind of creating a little bit of a universe and a mythology of its own.
Yeah, and even like Yoda to some extent. I would not compare Yoda to Kermit the Frog. One's a cartoon and one's so it's that more real practical effect creature versus that cartoony Muppet. I think those are more made. I don't think those are going away. I mean, they've had 2 Muppet movies in the last 5 years or something like that. I still go back. Muppets Take Manhattan.
Yeah, great.
One of my favorites. I love it. I love that movie. And so I think that people are kind of invested in those Muppets still. But the other ones, I think that people take shortcut routes. And I appreciate when a director, and I'm trying to think of a recent example, and this isn't very recent, but the Spider-Man 2 with Tobey Maguire.
Yeah, Sam Raimi.
So I love the Doc Ock character. I like the villain with the heart of gold. I like that character. And in the scene where he was in surgery and they had his octopus arms that were kind of going around, that was all done with puppetry. They did that whole scene, practical effects, no CGI. Until he gets him off the table and then there's CGI and you can tell it. But I thought, well, how cool that it was almost like they challenged themselves. How can we do this, if possible? Can we do it with practical effects? And they tried it out. And I respect that. But I also realize the realities of a film industry that you're limited by money and you're limited by certain things that you can do. And at some point, do you have to just move on and get it done? And I'm wondering what the distinct difference was in Jim Henson's time. When he made Labyrinth, what was the difference? Did movies, were they less expensive to make? Did he not care? Were the practical effects really that easy when they made Dark Crystal and those? I mean, because you had such intricate puppets and the sets, and a lot of times the sets were more difficult because they had to have room for the puppeteers to work underneath or behind.
Yeah,
And so as complex as those are, how were they able to get away with it?
Well, I think there was a certain level of craftsmanship and artistry, I think, there that people really took pride in. And a lot of those guys, they got old and they're either retired or they died. And I think now in Hollywood, we're in such a rush to get movies out that there's not a lot of time to develop those practical effects. So, I mean, you're just gonna fall back on the crutch of CGI and get it done fast. And I think back then, people took their time.
Yeah.
And it was kind of an expectation that, this movie's going to take 3 or 4 years to complete. but it's going to be good when it comes out, and it's gonna look good. In the context of that time. I mean, you look at some of those movies now, and you're like, well, geez, how did this thing ever get made? Because it looks like it was made in somebody's garage. But they worked well with what they had. I mean, I think one of the things that blew people's minds about Star Wars was what they were able to do with practical effects back then, where it looked like. Those movies hold up to this day. I mean, Labyrinth is a movie that holds up to this day.
Oh, absolutely. And I don't think that. I mean, I love those effects. I wonder, because they were so well done, how they were able to specifically get away with being able to do the movie, have it be successful, be able to do it under budget and make some money off of it. Whereas now it feels like, and I don't have a problem with CGI. There's some great CGI. I think the new Planet of the Apes films are phenomenal. I think they do a fabulous job with the CGI. But and I don't necessarily think I want them to spend an extra 5 years or possibly have the franchise die because it costs too much money for them to make all practical effects.
Yeah.
Then again, the Mark Wahlberg Planet of the Apes movie, or even the original Planet of the Apes movie, used costumes. I mean, they didn't use those special effects. The Mark Wahlberg version, I think, is a nice marriage between the two, because the original Planet of the Apes were very much, guy in a monkey mask kind of thing, versus the Mark Wahlberg one. I mean, they had some really intricate ape costumes, and they were really cool. But I'm sure they were not able to do a lot of things that they would possibly do in the new movies. I know the one scene in the movie that I thought was really neat is how they, at the very end, they had these competing, like the apes are running towards, kind of charging that end base or whatever.
Yeah.
And, in the Mark Wahlberg version, again, they were using practical effects. They put guys that went through this ape camp and learned how to run
like apes,
like apes. And then they had a treadmill system that made them faster. So some of them were running faster than the horses in the scene because they were on these treadmills, and it looked so cool. So you're able to do it. But if they would have spent that much time, money, and energy as they did in that scene on the new movies, it wouldn't have been quite as epic. They wouldn't have been able to have guys in monkey suits swinging from the bottom of the Golden Gate Bridge, or I think it was Golden Bridge. It was a bridge.
Yeah.
They wouldn't have been able to do that. And so I'm okay with them kind of, getting away from the practical effects, but I respect the practical effects.
But I think the point is you're not taking shortcuts just to ram something out.
That's true.
I think that's the point, is that once you get to the point where you're taking all these shortcuts and things like that, and you're not keeping the quality in mind. I think that's the thing that Jim Henson did, is that he didn't ever put anything out that I don't think that he could be proud of, or that he couldn't be proud of. That's what I mean to say.
Yeah, he went into it thinking that he was happy with his work. He was one of those guys that was always I think he did it primarily. I think everybody in some extent does things for the money. But I think, I don't think he didn't like having money. But I think that he was happy to go to work, and he was happy to create, and he was happy, to make these things, and he really enjoyed his job.
Yeah, he's one of those guys that I think that you can look back in history that he derived like great joy from what he did, and what he did was provide great joy to other people.
Yeah. Yeah.
And not a lot of people can say that, and Jim, I think that's why he's so revered to this day. Is like, Jim Henson is, I think, put on this pedestal, and I think rightfully so, in terms of like the creativity and the creative, just the world of creative minds, because of what he was able to do, and he did it in the right way, and by all accounts, he was a good person while he was doing it too.
Yeah, and I think
he died young. That's one of those things where it's like, what could he have done had he not died young?
Oh yeah, and you think the how people grow over the course of their craft and their careers, and what they're able to accomplish. I know people who have done filmography, and they look back at something they did a year ago or 5 years ago, and it's like night and day, and they're like, why did I put that out? Why did I produce that? What was that? And I think that, if you gave him another 5 years, another decade, another 40 years, what would we have seen? Would they still be alive and well now? Would we have more practical effects now even? I'm
just wondering, like 25 years from now, when we're listening to this podcast, are our ears going to bleed?
Absolutely not. We are like the voices. We have angelic, beautiful, profound voices. That's what we have.
That's that's high praise on like this. I think it's like the third episode here. So.
Yeah, something like that. Well, and I don't, I think that if you talk well about yourself, it's that. What do they call those, like, vision
fake
boards?
Fake it till you make it.
Yeah, fake it till you make it. You have to picture yourself and you want to attain it. It's like dressing for success. You dress for the job that you want, not the job that you have. I am going to praise ourselves for the thing that I want.
And that's why I'm wearing a three-piece suit right now.
It's the truth. Now there's one...
And a top hat, and I'm carrying a cane.
I'm just thinking, like, hello, my baby. Hello, my darling. Hello, ragtime girl. Like, that's what I figured. WB Frog.
You know what, though? I would watch Gonzo doing that.
That is true.
Yes.
Gonzo's one of the... Okay, I want to segue into another topic, but first I'm going to ask you, who is your favorite Muppet?
Oh, jeez.
And I'm gonna let you. You have to define it. Is it a creature or is it a Muppet? So you can pick a Muppet, or you can pick a creature, or you can pick both, but you have to define it so people know the difference.
I actually think it might be. It's a combo. It might be Dr. Vincent Honeydew and Beaker.
Really?
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, I think that might be like an out of like nowhere choice, but I think it might be those two, because I don't think you can separate those two.
Okay, yeah, that's true.
You know,
well, it's kind of like Statler and Waldorf. You know, like you can't, those come as a pair.
Either that or Ernie.
Ernie, okay.
When I was a little kid, people would ask me what I wanted to be when I grew up, and I would say Ernie.
Yeah, I could see that. So I'm gonna split it into I'm gonna split it into a third subsection. So favorite Sesame Street would be Elmo Says. Okay. I loved Elmo. Right. Like, I mean, just because he's so innocent. And actually, he's Josh in monster form. That is true. There's a great documentary called Being Elmo. It's fantastic. Fantastic movie. Yes. And it kind of gives you a little bit more depth. So I would say that was probably one of my favorite Sesame Street kind characters. Of a sad addendum to that documentary after a couple of years after it came out, but yeah, that's true. But I might change the answer, because I really did like Oscar the Grouch. Yes, because that actually is me. I pretend to be Elmo, but I'm really Oscar the Grouch. And then I think favorite Muppet, like in the category of like the Kermit the Frog and stuff. Gonzo is okay, but I really think Animal. Oh, yeah. Woman! Like, he just had such a... Like, he would come in at the appropriate times and all those things. Favorite creature, Jim Henson? Hoggle. Hoggle, hands down. Hoggle from Labyrinth. Yes. I mean, you got Bluto, but Hoggle just, he had it. Hoggle needs his own standalone movie. We were talking about that. I mean, you sent me like a message the other day, and it was about the Labyrinth spinoff, and I was like, it's going to be a standalone Hoggle film. Yeah, like I think a prequel. How did Hoggle? And I think it could be this not coming of age story, but what made Hoggle the way he was, because he transformed from the beginning of Labyrinth into a better person by the end of Labyrinth. You know what would be great though, if like the prequel was Hoggle as like a good person. That's what like I mean. An upstanding, like he's in Hobbiton, like maybe he lived next door to Frodo and Bilbo. Maybe. What made him that way? Yeah. I like to know the origins of characters. Yeah, why was he jaded and like that? Why did he get like? Because we only saw how it started, but we didn't really see the end of it. We didn't really see how it started, though. Now, John, there's one area, and I'm going to see if you can guess it, where puppetry is alive and well, where it is thriving. Can you think of any place that puppets are thriving? Jeff Dunham. Well, you're not wrong. Live theater. Live theater is a place that is keeping, I think, almost single-handedly, besides Sesame Street, honestly, I think that live theater is where puppets are being really staying alive. I think that's why people are still able to get in the craft, because there's only X number of people that get to work on puppets or Muppets in Sesame Street and things like that. And a lot of times they're not creating new ones. They're just, basically handling the old ones. They're not doing creation and stuff like that. With live theater, there's so many different areas. And Lion King is a perfect example. The Broadway musical where they have, hundreds of different puppets. Another one is War Horse, where they have horses on stage, and they have 3 actors that are controlling each one of the horses. And a horse's lung capacity is about 3 times that of a human, and so all 3 of them make the sounds of the horse simultaneously and make different versions of it. And not only do they have to control the puppet together, they have to walk and move together, and they also have to make the vocalizations together. And the final example. King Kong, which was, I'm not sure if it's ever going to come to Broadway, but in Australia, their equivalent of Broadway, they had King Kong the musical where it premiered, and they were going to bring it to the States, but they have this huge puppet. I mean, I don't know how tall he is. I mean, a couple stories tall, and they have 35 puppeteers for that one puppet. 35 puppeteers, and it's incredible. It's an incredible feat, and because they cannot CGI it, if they have to make a practical effect, they have to make a practical effect. Yeah. They can have a couple lighting effects or some overlay video, but by and large, in theater, they have to make it.
You got to do it real. It's got to be
And so I would argue that puppetry, as it stands today, is being resuscitated primarily by live theater, because a lot of the people that get into the craft at one point work in theater to learn some of the skills of puppetry or how to keep it alive, and then they might move on to some of the special effects. But because movies are sort of moving away from practical effects in a way, by and large, I think that live theater sometimes is keeping it alive.
Oh, I think you're right, and it's kind of funny that you mentioned that, because I think it was in the movie Forgetting Sarah Marshall, where Jason Segel's character writes the it's like the Dracula musical with the puppets.
Yep.
Apparently, he actually did that in real life.
Oh.
And the only way he could get it produced, and maybe I'm making this up, but was to fit it into that movie, because he wrote that movie. But he couldn't get anybody to actually make that puppet movie. But he made it part of his character in the movie so that he could get some kind of bring that to fruition in some way. And he's a huge fan of the Muppets.
John, even if it's not true, it's a great story. It's a great story. When you say something on the internet, it becomes true. It just immediately becomes true. It has validity. Well, and this is kind of a merging of the two. So I was talking about live theater, and we talked about Sesame Street. When it came out, I think it was in 2003-ish, somewhere in there, early 2000s. Avenue Q was a Broadway musical, and it was kind of the adult version of Sesame Street. I mean, the songs like "The Internet is for Porn."
Yeah, are you familiar with Wonder Chosen?
Wonder Chosen? No.
That's something I got to expose you to, because it's like Sesame Street on crack, like just taking a big long drag on this crack pipe.
Really?
Yes,
and it's called Wonder
Chosen.
And is that something new? Is it old?
It came out probably about 10, 15 years ago, but it was on I think they aired it on Comedy Central. But they did such a thing, they would dress kids up like in a Nazi uniform, and they'd have them go out and interview people on the street.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, they don't hold back.
No, and then you have a puppet or a Muppet that would go and ask people for crack. Things like that, and it was just it was kind of like a prank show, but it wasn't at the same time.
I think we should just completely delete the last 20 or so minutes of what we've talked about, because when I first started, I was like, not a lot of puppet Muppets out there, and we're talking about this Wonder Chosen, Avenue Q. Remember Crank Anchors?
Yeah. Well, but have you heard of this new movie that they're making? It's going to be an R-rated movie. It's going to be called The Happy Time Murders, or Happy. I think it's Happy Time Murders, but Melissa McCarthy just signed on to be in the movie, and it's set in a universe where Muppets and humans live side by side.
Wow!
And it's been in development.
It's like the Who Framed Roger Rabbit.
Yes, and it's been in development for several years, but they finally have been able to get some bigger names, and it's moving its way down the track. And they have some concept art where there's this Muppet that looks like this hard, rough and tumble detective next to a human being, who's a detective, and they're partners, and they're looking at this dead Muppet on the ground.
I love it.
Yeah, I mean it's a great concept.
John, again, you and I are individual creatures, but I think that we complement each other really well. And in 20 minutes, for me to totally change my viewpoint of puppets and Muppets, for me to think, no, maybe there's still hope. I mean, but because
I almost think that we're almost just over the hill from a Muppet Renaissance.
A Muppet Renaissance. There were. I remember when like puppets and Muppets and things like that were so big, and I remember one of the things that was so, kind of like interesting about Muppets is, we talked about, Jim Henson being like the Muppets. And I think that was more international, but there was a lot of theater and stuff, and one of them, Mummenschanz. Are you familiar with that?
Mummenschanz.
No, I'm not. It's just like it was this weird like they did a lot of mask and prop kind of stuff, but like their puppets a lot of times were they looked like almost like giant slinkies.
Okay.
And it was more like shapes and puppets and stuff. It was that more artistic version of it, where Jim Henson was more comical, and now we're getting into this more adult, crude humor. And
I actually think that might be because of people like us who grew up with them and are big fans of it. Like, for some reason, we can't, like... I think people that are, like, in the decision-making positions in Hollywood don't understand that we would probably... enjoy it just as much now as we did when we were young, because like the thing about the Muppet Show, it had like nuance. There was the adult humor, but there was also the child humor, and I think we're almost going like to the extreme where like we need to have like adults only Muppet stuff.
Yeah. Well, because it's nostalgic for us, and so we try to bring it back in that way. Well,
but why not make it in such a way that we can enjoy it with our kids?
Well, because we're selfish.
Yeah.
We just want it for us.
True.
I don't want my stinking kids to have joy and entertainment of clean Muppet humor.
Yeah.
I want it to be crude, and because I don't mind when somebody takes... I think, for instance, Team America World Police is a fabulous...
Oh, it's genius.
Movie. It is genius. It is crude, but the South Park creators, I mean, they have a certain niche and a way to do things to make them crude yet bearable. And I think Team America World Police was fabulous. I wouldn't want to see that movie not be made at the expense of making a version for child.
I agree completely.
But... we should be able to do both. The problem, I think, is because we have a Sesame Street and we have a Muppets. Do we need another one, or should those be able to fill that void for the current generation?
I almost think we kind of need another one, because like the thing is like I don't know if I want to see like a super adult Muppet Show. And I think that's one of the reasons why the newest version on ABC didn't go real well, because I mean you were dealing with Miss Piggy's like relationship problems and things like that, when I don't think that's what people are looking for when it comes to the Muppets. Like you're looking for like Gonzo to be like this unrequited love with Miss Piggy, and you're looking for Kermit to be in love with Miss Piggy and this and that. I mean those characters are such so I think burned into the memory of people and who they are, and it's the same problem that you have with characters like Wonder Woman, Batman, Superman, Spider-Man. You can't change them too much because they are what people think they are.
Well,
and you can't change them a lot. So I think you do need like a third group, like maybe Happy Time's the third group.
But there are Muppet things like when you talk about like Barney Teletubbies, the kind of like people in a suit, Yo Gabba Gabba, like some of those I would consider in that area of Muppety puppetish kind of stuff, but it just doesn't quite do it. They're never long lasting. I mean, the Muppets have been around for decades. These other ones are kind of fleeting, and we haven't picked one.
Yeah, you speak of things in suits.
Yeah.
And one of those would be Sweetums in the Muppet Show.
Now, you have kind of a hidden, dark, deep secret that you're going to reveal here.
When I was a kid, I was, maybe still to this day, I was terrified of Sweetums. Like, he would come on the screen, and you'd get like that guttural, like, I'm going to throw up because I'm so terrified of this thing.
Really?
And I loved watching the Muppet Show, but every time Sweetums would come on the screen, it was like I have to like close my eyes because I can't watch this thing.
That's because
and for those of you who are unfamiliar with the character of Sweetums, he's the big like furry guy with the giant lips on the Muppet Show.
I don't really think that you're helping the listening audience when you're like,
true.
That Muppet. Check out the big furry one with lips. And they were big lips. It kind of narrows it down to. I guess not a lot of Muppets have lips.
That's true. They just have mouths.
Miss Piggy did because she had the lipstick, or maybe it was just lipstick on skin. Like, ooh, Kermie. It was like just the lipstick that was on there. John, I like reliving my childhood with you. I like, going back into the depths there because, it's so fleeting. Time is fleeting, and I wanna be a kid again. And I feel like when I chat with you, I can be.
I'm excited about this Muppet Renaissance. That you know what? And if it doesn't happen, let's make it happen.
Yes, I think so. And if it doesn't happen, la resistance.
And that's why if you look in my garage, I have hundreds of Muppets that I've homemade.
And on that note, we're going to end pop culture problems before we get into the serial killer
that is a
portion of the show. Because anytime you have a garage full of Muppets, somebody is a little deranged. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll see you next time right here on Pop Culture Problems.